Welcome to the Panteva Perspective, Corporate Immigration and Global Mobility.
Welcome back to the Panteva Perspective, Corporate Immigration and Global Mobility with immigration attorney Iskra Panteva. Iskra is the founder of Panteva Law Group in Chicago, where she helps companies, entrepreneurs, and highly skilled professionals navigate the complexities of U.S. business immigration. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're talking about PERM labor certification and what employers should understand when sponsoring an employee for a green card. Ms. Iskra, welcome back, my dear.
Thank you for having me again.
So, Iskra, what is a perm labor certification, and where does it fit into the employment-based green card process?
Well, the PERM certification is a very kind of a unique form of an immigration process. It's a certification from the Department of Labor. It's not part of the USCIS process. It's not part of the immigration, but it's part of the Department of Labor. Basically, it's a certification where an employer is asking the Department of Labor that they cannot find employees that are willing and able U.S. citizens or U.S. eligible um, employees, and they cannot find them. So they are looking for people outside of the United States. So basically, the employer will test the job market, and the Department of Labor will review the process and will see what the employer has done so far in terms of recruitment, and then they will certify it. If they see that there is no really willing and able U.S. workers to take the position, then they're going to go ahead and certify that PERM document. And with that, basically, the employer can go ahead and petition the USCIS for a green card for their employee.
Which employees are typically good candidates for a perm sponsorship?
Usually, regular employees, right? If you have employees that are already on a H-1B visa or even O-1 or some other type of visa, and you want them to be permanently in the United States, and you want to keep them permanently long term in their position, usually we will provide you can, and it's something that is very difficult to find here in the United States. Usually you will provide their opportunity for the opportunity for the employee to move ahead and become a green card holder to a permanent residency.
What must employers establish before they can even begin this perm process?
Well, the one of the most important thing that the employer needs to establish is, especially if we're talking about smaller employers that have less than 100 employees, is they have to establish that they have the ability to pay. It's a very, very important part of the process, and I think that a lot of times it has been overlooked by the employers, and unfortunately, the problem comes up at the very tail end of the process, right? So it's a very long process. The whole perm certification can take about two and a half years, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. But by the time you are done with all of this, 2 3 years have passed, and now at the end of this process, you have to prove that you have the ability to pay. And especially for smaller employers, that means that they have to show to the government that they have made profit, or at least that they have paid the employee if they are currently, if that employee is currently in their payroll, they're paying them the wages required by the government. So it's really, really important to make sure that you have the ability to pay these wages. Otherwise, the whole process can be derailed at the very end of it. And it can be very frustrating, obviously, for employers, for employees, for us as attorneys. Obviously, you don't want to be putting all of your efforts until the very end of it, and then realize that the employer cannot pay the wages, and that, or at least you cannot prove that they can pay the wages, and that can become very, very bothersome.
So that recruitment is a key part of perm. What does the recruitment process usually involve in your experience?
So the recruitment is different, right? You have, depending on whether or not the position is professional or non-professional position, you have different recruitments. The recruitment usually is prescribed by the government and by the regulations. So you cannot decide, oh, I want to, I want to do this or I want to do that. You usually will do whatever is prescribed by the government so you can test the job market. And here it's not, as I said, it's usually testing the job market is kind of the key concept in the recruitment process. The employer is required to present the job opportunity. They are required to present that at least to um, 3 to 6 different avenues. And they need to figure out whether or not those employees or there will be any candidates that can fill the position. If there is candidates, US candidates that can fill that position, then the PERM process is failing. And that means that, the Department of Labor cannot certify the PERM. And then they cannot move ahead with the sponsorship of that employee. So really important process. First it's the advertisement, then the review of the resumes, and then after that, obviously interviews if they're applicable.
How does the job description influence a perm filing?
Well, it is really important. It depending on the job descriptions, you will have professional position or non-professional position. It will that will base the recruitment, right? If sometimes the recruitment will be, you will need to present more evidence that there is no able and willing US workers to take the position. Um, and sometimes the position itself can be very problematic, right? If especially if it's a straightforward position, most likely you're gonna be able to find US workers. Now if there is situations where the employer is looking for very specialized skills, a lot of times there might not be available US workers to kind of satisfy those skills. And this is the key. Not every single position will be certified by the Department of Labor. So you need to make sure that you are aware, especially when going through the process, whether or not the position that you're putting together is something that is worth, the money, the investment, and whether or not there is really no option for you to find anybody else. Usually, employers in this situation have already done a recruitment, right? They have gone through recruitment for 6 months, sometimes years. They're looking for specialized positions, specialized talent, and they cannot find it. So going through the perm process is just going through the whatever is required by the government. So it's kind of a double situation, right? Double recruitment.
So, do you have an example or maybe a story or anything where a company decided to move forward with perm sponsorship?
Yeah, of course. We have tons of employers that are going through the perm process. This happens especially for employees that have, as I said, very specialized knowledge about certain processes in the company. They have specific skills. They have usually education. It's not always a professional positions, right? We can look for non-professional positions as well. When and we didn't discuss that, but usually for non-professional positions, we might be talking about like chefs or people in the industry. Like for example, somebody that has a very specialized knowledge of Chinese cuisine, or somebody that has a very specialized knowledge in Indonesian cuisine. If a lot of times it happens that the employers will not going to be able to find US workers that are specialized in Japanese cuisine, right? And they will want to bring somebody from overseas that has already those skills, has the experience, have the education maybe and training to perform those duties. And this is what happens a lot of times. We not every position can be not every position we can find US workers for that position. So this is how we are looking for, and we're looking at the perm process.
So, how How long does the PERM process typically take from that start to the approval?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was actually looking into the timelines right now. The perm process is has three sub processes. So we are looking at the prevailing wage determination. Basically, the employer presents the position and says, here is the position, here is the location. Please, Department of Labor, tell us how much money we need to pay that for that type of position. So the Department of Labor usually takes about 4 to 5 months to look at the position, look at the location, and pull out the information and say, okay, you need to pay, I don't know, $50,000, for example. Once they do that, so we are, once we have that number, we can go ahead and start recruiting. The recruitment again takes about 2 to 3 months. So we are looking at about, you know, um here probably like 8 months already, and then after that you can go ahead, the employer can go ahead and file the perm certification. The perm certification, currently I was looking at the numbers, they are processing cases from January of 2025. So you see, this is like, it takes about a year and 5 months right now. They're saying that it takes them 550 days currently to process these cases. So we are looking at, as I said, a year and a half on top of those 8 months. So it's over 2 years at this point, and this is just so you can get the certification. That doesn't mean anything. This certification, if the employer doesn't go through the process with the USCIS, doesn't mean anything, right? You can just throw it in the garbage. The paper doesn't give you status, doesn't give you anything. So with that certification, then you need to go through the USCIS, apply there, and then make sure that that has to be approved. The approval for the I-140 currently can take between 15 days for premium processing, somewhere up to 6 to 8 months for a regular processing. So we're talking about 3 years, right? And on top of that, we are, for currently for EB2, you can, for countries, for all countries around the world, you can file your green card application, which will take about another 8 months to be approved. However, for certain countries like China and India, the waiting time is much longer. Currently, we are looking
Mhm.
at about 11 years for India, a little bit less
Wow.
than less for China. So, a lot of times people are saying, oh, it's, all these people are coming in and they're getting green cards, they're becoming citizens. It's
Wow.
a very, very, very long process. If somebody is coming here through the employment-based visa to get a green card, it takes many, many, many years for a lot of people. And they're really struggling during that process.
So, what are some common issues that can cause this delay, or complicate a perm case?
Yeah, I mean, they were doing a lot of changes on the perm process, and that was in the previous administration, in the current administration, and they're just playing a catch-up games, right? In the year past, we've had situations where they were, issuing prevailing wage determinations for a month, issuing certifications for 4 months. So, obviously that's much more manageable time frame. But currently, as you can see, a lot of those, there is huge delays from the Department of Labor. Now, one of the things that are happening in the most recent kind of couple of months, the most recent year, I would say, a lot of the waiting times have been a little bit, they are less of a waiting time right now. One of those example is EB2 under all countries category. The reason why there is no waiting time, from our perspective, is because of all the bans that are happening on visas across the world. So the Department of State is not issuing any visas That means that all these numbers have not been used. Because those numbers are not used, certain categories are getting less of a waiting time. And when this happens, people that are in the United States are actually benefiting from the process. The people that are outside of the United States are on a limbo right there. they, they have to wait, and we don't know for how long. So, obviously, good news, bad news, depends, I guess, where you are in the world.
Yeah. So how does PERM fit into a company's long-term immigration strategy for employees?
Yeah, I mean, usually when you're going that path of hiring employees that were not born in the United States, if you are in a situation where you really want to keep those employees, they're uniquely qualified, you definitely want to have a long-term plan of how exactly you want to keep that talent within your organization. So a lot of times, the employers will have a policy in place where they will say, okay, we are going to sponsor for H-1B, for example, but we are not going to sponsor for a green card right away. Let's see how performance is. And then within 6 months, maybe we can sponsor you. Obviously, it's a policy, internal policy of the companies. Different companies and organizations have different processes in place. Some employers will sponsor the same day. The moment they sponsor for H-1B, they will sponsor you for a green card. And some of them will wait up until the last minute in order for them to spend those money. So it's a different situation. Obviously, different industries like IT industry, they're much more equipped to deal with those type of processes. They know how things are, and they might be able to do that from the start. Some other companies, if they're not used to the process, might delay it, and that can be detrimental. Honestly, we've had situations where the processing times have been kind of too long, and the employees had to leave, go to Canada or somewhere else. I mean, it depends on the employers and how they view those immigration processes. Obviously, it's not easy to sponsor somebody on a permanent residency visa. It is very difficult to go through the process. It's expensive. It is a very long-term process. But if you really want to keep those employees, you definitely want to start planning as early as possible. Maybe have a policy in place for those type of employees, and make sure that you are doing everything. All of those um, policies that you're putting in place, they are implemented across the board.
Good stuff. Ms. Iskra, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking with you.
That's it for today's episode of the Panteva Perspective, Corporate Immigration and Global Mobility. To learn more about Ms. Iskra Panteva and the work she does with employment-based immigration, visit panteva.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe to the show, and share this episode with someone who might need it as well. We'll see you all next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.